The Rangers were officially eliminated from playoff contention on Saturday and now have 2 games left in their season. Definitely a disappointing season for the Blueshirts and their fans. So let's talk about it with the great hockey columnist for the New York Post, my guy Larry Brooks, joins me now. Larry, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Dexter. I'm doing better than I think the guys right now in Florida.
Yeah, you're doing a lot better than them. They're not doing so well. And yesterday, Saturday it was, we saw the Rangers get crushed by Carolina 7-3 to end their playoff hopes. When you look at this season, Larry, what were the biggest factors that led to the Blue Shirts' failure to qualify for the playoffs?
Oh, honestly, it goes back to last summer.
Mm.
This was a massive underachievement. Um, Everyone is responsible from top to bottom. Everyone has his share of responsibility. Um, there were issues that came in, there was noise around the Rangers all season, starting in training camp when the Jacob Trouba issue from the summer then seeped into the season. And they started training camp with a lame duck captain who knew that the team wanted to move on from him, had tried to move on from him. He blocked it. The Rangers were doing nothing. We're not asking him to waive a clause in his contract. They were acting properly under the CBA. They tried to trade him. Trouba was able to use his influence to block a trade, even though he was had a 15 team no trade list. He had a no move, it transferred. We're going back to a year ago because that's where all this started. Drury wanted to make changes after they lost to Florida. The major change was going to be Trouba. He had already waived Barclay Goodrow, and apparently there were hurt feelings over that too when training camp started. And I just saw a group that took on a victim's mentality. They were so mentally weak. They allowed personal grievances because they thought their friends had been mistreated. I don't know. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm not sure that I've ever been around such a sensitive group.
Wow.
They took everything personally. And even when it was not at them, it was like somebody else, something. So they started the season with discontent. On the eve of the opener, there's a report that Shesterkin has rejected an $11 million deal, 8 years. So that then became a distraction for them. They never played well. They never played well. They got off to a good start. They were 12-4-1, but we talked all the time about how it felt that we were watching a 4-12-1 team.
Mm.
They were winning on goaltending and they were winning on muscle memory, but they were playing poorly. And um, then then things started to break down. Their veteran players got off to bad starts, and there was a lot of disillusionment. Um, and essentially everyone on the player underachieved. Every player on the team underachieved except maybe for Will Cooley, Matt Rempe, Sam Carrick, Johnny Brodzinski. We're talking about support players. They never were quite able to gain their equilibrium. They kind of settled things down in January. They made the trade for JT Miller, but their deficiencies, their on ice deficiencies, their lack of discipline, their inability to defend, which started in game one, just killed them. They were a terrible defensive team. Their power play that had been among the best in the league the last 3 seasons, they basically had the same power play components for 5 years, where they were near the top of the league. It catered this year because all of their best players were cratering.
Mm.
And so, Peter Laviolette, the head coach, stayed with the first unit for 30 games, 40 games, 50 games, 60 games. And their specialty teams that had been um, one of their strengths last year became a weakness. And so they had nothing to fall back on. They really had nothing to fall back on. They were uninspired. It never looked like they were fully invested in a playoff race. It was just going to be too hard. They weren't winning anything. And so it was just from start to finish a very difficult season.
Yeah,
To be a very difficult season for them and a very difficult season to watch.
yeah, it was. I think a lot of fans would agree with that, and they would say there were a lot of problems with this team. But you also mentioned the head coach and Peter Laviolette because he's been scrutinized for his role in the team not making the playoffs. How much responsibility, Larry, should he shoulder here, and is it likely at all that he returns as head coach of the Rangers?
I would be surprised if he's back. I understand that it's going to be a fourth coach in 6 years for the Rangers. And as Joe Girardi once said, or said 1,000 times, that's not what you want. You don't want four coaches in 6 years. You're always switching systems. You're switching assistant coaches. But I think that Laviolette, while he may not have been the biggest problem on the team this year, he was never a solution. I thought he was stubborn, and I think all coaches are, and certainly coaches who have been in the league for 20 years, the way he has. He's the seventh winningest coach in NHL history. He's won a Stanley Cup. He's gotten to a couple of other finals. So he is a successful NHL coach, which is not an easy thing to do. He's won like 750 more games than I have. So I respect Peter Laviolette, but I just don't think he had a handle on this team this year. Their defensive scheme, their defensive structure was non-existent. It was non-existent. And again, they won their opener in Pittsburgh, game one. They win 6-0. But the first 10 or 12 minutes of that game, there is shot after shot from the slot, wide open areas in front, and Shesterkin, performs magic, and they win in the shutout. But that's the way they played all year. They never contested the tough areas on the ice. They gave up odd man rushes because of their propensity to try and make pretty plays through traffic and try and go east-west. There was no forecheck. Honestly, you look at the team and you just break it down, and there was one mishap after another, one liability after another, and the coach was just unable to correct it. And I thought, he has a reputation as being a veteran coach. Most coaches do. It's not unusual. And again, when you're in the league for 20 years, that's kind of the MO, right? But the Rangers had younger players that needed more ice time, that needed to be put in better positions, and every one of their young players regressed this year except for Will Cooley. So again, I don't want to make Peter Laviolette the scapegoat because there is blame to go around. But again, I don't think he was a solution for them either.
Right. You're
So I,
saying
I would be surprised if he's back. I don't, I don't have I'm not told by a source. I think they will evaluate it after the year, but I'd be surprised.
you're shocked if he is back and saying that he's not the solution. One follow up on that, Larry, because a lot of fans are going to start and say, okay, if he's not the solution, then who is? Is there, I know it's maybe early because the season isn't done yet, but are there any names that you think might be the solution? There have been some Ranger fans that have brought up your old friend John
Well,
Tortorella
I know it's not.
possibly
I
coming.
know it's not Tortorella who's the
Not Torch at
solution.
all.
He's not. No, he's. I mean, he sows chaos. Listen, his last two stops. Has there been? Was there measurable progress? Yes. The first couple of years in Columbus, he took them. He took them to the playoffs. They won 2 rounds, I think.
Yeah.
But then his last couple of years, they fell back again. In Philadelphia, no one really developed. There's always too much tension around him, and it's not a winning formula anymore. He's won 2 rounds since he left New York in 2012. So what are we talking about here? They need You
Hmm.
know, they need a coach that has a different outlook, that is going to lean into their younger players and is going to give a lot of responsibility to the younger players. Obviously, David Carl, the coach of Denver University, they were just beaten in the semifinals, going for a repeat in Frozen Four, beaten by Western Michigan, which won the title. I mean, you know, Western Michigan then beat BU to win the Frozen Four. Um, so David Carl is going to be a hot commodity out there. He's going to have his pick of teams. I'm told that, you know, he's not in a rush to get to the NHL, that he wants, you know, a perfect solution, that he wants a perfect situation for him. So I don't know if it's New York, but he's the kind of coach
Hmm.
I think that the Rangers need to be looking for. They need to move past, and again, I don't mean to be disrespectful using this word, but they need to move past the recyclables. They need
Hmm.
to, you know, move past the Peter Laviolettes, the Gerard Gallants, the, you know, the John Hines, who's, you know, who they contemplated at, you know, the last cycle. I have a lot of respect for them, but the Rangers, you know, the Rangers need a different element. They need a coach who's going to lean into their younger players. That's the bottom line for me. And because they're the Rangers, they're always going to be able to attract, if you know, if the cap um, you know, if the cap works, they're always going to be able to attract marquee players here, always.
Right.
So you need to be able to develop the younger guys to bring in the free agents to finish the team, not to be the center of the team, not to be the core of the team. Their young guys need to be the core of their team.
Yeah, and we're going to get to the core in 1 second. Thank you for that perspective on who you think the Rangers should, what kind of coach, I should say, they should look at if they do decide to move on from Peter Laviolette. I also wanted to talk to you, Larry, about General Manager Chris Drury, because when you look at him from his deadline moves to the makeup of the roster heading into this season, as you noted before, how much blame does he deserve for this team missing the postseason? Because I know you said there's blame to go all around. Is this a case where Drury is also going to be evaluated as we head to the offseason?
I think he will. It's my sense that he's secure for next year. I could be wrong, but that's my sense. And of course, he is shares responsibility for this. Again, he made some loud mistakes, and I think, you know, again, going back to last summer, it was a vexing position when he came up against Truba. You know, I'm not sure exactly, you know, I wasn't on the conversations, I wasn't on the phone calls. I'm not sure how he could have remedied this, but I do know this, that the biggest lesson from this season is that off-season business has to be taken care of in the off-season. The summer has to stay in the summer. And if there are going to be tricky scenarios this summer, and there very well may be, it has to be taken care of cleanly and quickly in the off season, so that there is no, there's no, there's no overhang. There's no, uh, you don't go into training camp with a liability. You know, you go into training camp with your best foot forward. So I think that, you know, the Trouba situation, I think, upended um, the season to a large degree. I think, you know, Chris, I think, and I wrote this a number of times. Chris, I think, needed to meet with the team on a, you know, early in the season, when there was all this narrative about how unhappy everybody was about Barclay Goodrow, how unhappy everybody was about Jacob Trouba, how unhappy Jacob Trouba was. I think that Chris Kreider, I mean, I think that Chris Drury, sorry, I think that Chris Drury needed to go into that locker room and have a meeting with them and say, look, if you're not happy playing for me, if you don't want to play for the Rangers, we'll move you out.
Mm-hmm.
We'll move you out. And I think that was the responsibility of every player on the team who felt somehow insulted by Drury's actions. They should have gone to him and said, I don't want to be here anymore. But no, none of them did. They just
Hmm.
whined.
Hmm.
So, again, I think that, Drury's, trade memo that was leaked where he named Kreider and Trouba as players who were available was certainly a mistake. I thought it was a naive mistake. Again, I think he should have gone into the room and said, what's going on here? Um, but he didn't do that, and so I think he needs to be a lot closer to the locker room next year. And I think his exit meetings with the players when the season ends are vital. I think there needs to be 100% transparency from him to the players and from the players to him. He needs to learn. He's still young in the job. He's been here 4 years. Um, they've been to two conference finals his first 3 years on the job. So, um, it's not as if, his regime has been a massive failure. This season was a massive failure, an abject failure from top to bottom,
Yep.
honestly.
No doubt.
And so he shoulders some of the responsibility for that. Of course he does. But
Yep.
I would be surprised if he's not back.
All right, so expecting Drury to be back. Couple more things for me, Larry. I want to talk to you about the core of this team, right? Because been together for a while, for several years. We're talking about Panarin, we're talking about Zibanejad, Kreider, Trocheck. Is it time to break up that group, or do you look at that core and say they can still be a championship foundation with the right supporting cast, with some of the right younger players coming around those guys?
No, I wrote last year that it was time to break up the core
Hmm.
because they had gone as far as they could. No, I think, the core as we know it, that kind of formed in 2019-20 when they signed Panarin, when they traded for Trouba, when they were able to acquire Adam Fox. And, that you added that group onto Kreider and Mika Zibanejad, that has been the core. But, Trouba's now gone, right? Kako, who was there from 2019-20, is now gone. Um, so I think the core isn't what it was, and I think it'll be. I think it needs. Look, I think from the body language, from his play on ice the last 2 months, Chris Kreider knows he's gone. And I'm not sure what the alienation of affection was between Kreider and management. Maybe it was that memo, but um, other players have dealt with things like that far better than Chris did this year. And I like Chris a lot. I've known him since he was 19 years old. We've always had a really good relationship. Um, but other players see their names in trade rumors. They don't shut down. I'm not necessarily suggesting that Kreider shut down,
Mm-hmm.
but he sure wasn't productive. I mean, he has scored one power play goal in 2025. One. How is it possible? Seriously, how is it possible? He has one primary assist this year, one, all season. How is it possible? So I think that it's a foregone conclusion that Kreider is gone. Um, the unfortunate part of the season beyond the season is that a lot of very good Rangers reputations have taken a massive hit this year. Evolved into a very unpopular team with the fan base. It didn't look like they tried. That's, you can be bad, but you can't look like you're not into it.
Yeah, you can't
And
not see
they
the
had
effort.
so
Right.
many no-shows, just so many no-shows where their reputation has taken a real hit. Players here who have been here for a while and have been very good Rangers, their legacy has been tarnished by this year. Now, when we get a distance from it, maybe there'll be, more perspective, a long view perspective. But for now, it's like the last 12 years of Chris Kreider's career almost don't matter. It was a year ago that he scored the hat trick in Raleigh to
Right.
get
To,
them
to,
into the
to send,
finals.
right.
And it's like within 12 months, he went from the zenith of his career to the nadir of his career. And so I think there's a lot more to give from Chris Kreider, and I think he'll probably, but I think he will be somewhere else. I expect a conversation about Zibanejad. He has a no move clause, so
Mm-hmm.
again, that is going to be a tricky one, but it needs to be taken care of one way or another early in the offseason so that nothing trickles into training camp. So I think the core that we're talking about, I think the core now is essentially Igor Shesterkin, Adam Fox, Will Cooley, to be determined, and JT Miller is going to be the linchpin of this team. And Vincent Trocek. To me, that's the core. Add Braden Schneider. But when we're talking about a veteran core now, it's JT Miller and it's Vincent Trocek and it's Adam Fox. I think who will be the core, and of course Panarin. I didn't mean to leave out Panarin. I think he probably has had the best year of all of their marquee players this year. And so I think it's going to be an interesting discussion with him about a contract extension. We'll see about that, but um, so I think the core is going to be changed, because we look at the core and it's basically been Kreider, Zibanejad, Trouba. That's I think what we've accepted as the core of the team.
Yeah. Changes coming likely for the Rangers core this offseason. A lot of takeaways from me here, Larry, in terms of the Rangers and what they could do going forward. But as you said, a disappointing season for them nonetheless. We appreciate your insight. That is Larry Brooks, the great hockey columnist for the New York Post. Larry, thanks for joining me, and I'm sure we'll be talking plenty through this
I'm
offseason.
sure we, I'm sure we will. Thanks, Dexter.
No problem.